Romans, the 8th chapter, beginning at the 28th verse, and reads, "And we know that God causes all things." And we know that God causes all things. And we know that God causes all things. Look at a few people, tell that's everything. That's everything. All things to work together for good. To those who love God, those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed into the image of his Son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brethren. And these whom he predestined, he also called. And these whom he also called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. What shall we say then to these things? If God is for us, who should be against us? Right before you take your seats, I'm telling you, you need to do this. And I don't care how comfortable you've been, how dignified you are, how long you've been saved, or how long you've been here. I want you to not stop until you give at least 10 people. Just give them a firm squeeze and tell them, God's got you. Tell them he's got you. Got you. God, Sister Belle, go. You better not sit down, girl. Give 10 hugs. God got you. God got you. What it feels like. He's got you. Got you. I don't care what's in your bank account. Hallelujah. I challenge you to not allow familiarity with this text to cause you to miss its freshness, a new application in our time today. While the writer Paul, you've heard me do work on this before, and I'm not going down that trail, but this is a certified letter by a certified servant. As we know, the books of the Bible are not arranged in chronological order or order of occurrence, the way we have them canonized within our canon of Scripture or our Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. Generally speaking, there are the Gospels, and then the book of Acts. And then we find after that Romans, and then the rest of the books to follow. But interestingly, the Corinthians, Paul's letter where he describes his trials and what he's willing to suffer for the gospel's sake, while it is canonized order, it is after this book of Romans in chronological order or in order of occurrence. The trials that he spoke of actually took place before this. So this is not a man, again, giving hollow hope. But it's the same man that says, I was beaten, I was shipwrecked, I was stoned, I was left for dead, I was beaten with 40 lashes minus one. I was in danger in the city, in danger in fields, in danger from false brethren. He, at the end of all those things, uses as his suffering a way to qualify himself as a servant of the Most High God. All those things happened before this book of Romans was ever penned, which shows that the writer and the vessel actually went through what he was talking about. At the end of all of his sufferings, he concludes, no matter what I've been through, no matter what I've faced. In fact, there are many who believe that he was, at this point in time, in significant trouble. But yet optimism arises out of this this unfortunate predicament, and as he looks back over his shoulder on all the apparently unfortunate predicaments, he concludes or makes this bold statement. Crazy, foolish statement. He says, guys, I've come to the conclusion that everything in my life, everything I've gone through, is working together for good. And he shares that, here's what I believe. I believe it's not only for me, but this promise is for people that check the box in two categories. He says, number one, it's for those who love the Lord. And then those who are called according to his purpose. Now, if you're wondering if you qualify for this passage, if all things work together for the good, question by a show of hands, or just amen will do. How many of you love the Lord? Amen. All right, good. Just checking, make sure I'm in the right place. He says, if you love him and are, listen, he said to all those who love him and are the called according to his purpose. How many of you are called? Let me hear you say amen. Amen. That amen was reduced just a little bit on the second half of that. The reason is because, again, this idea of love and our love for God is one that is, in many respects, subjective. We know. You can't tell me I don't love Jesus. You can't tell me I don't love God. That's something I know my worst of days. Well, I have questions in my mind while I'm perplexed, trying to figure out why I am where I am, why I'm going through what I'm going through, and how God could allow this in my life. Even in those darkest of times, I don't ever think anyone in this place would not conclude that they love God. But often we wrestle with this sense of call. That God, am I in the category of those who God would have called? He said all things work together for those that love him and that are called according to his purpose. Now, I just want to make sure we go ahead and qualify you. Look at your neighbor, tell them you're qualified. In fact, I love this. We'll get to it in a minute, but you've been pre-qualified. You've been pre-qualified for everything that God has for you, even before they've done the deep, lasting background or credit check. Nobody ever wants to hear the words. I don't care if you're trying to. You know, it upsets me. I would want just to switch my cell phone number, and they say we have to run a quick credit check. And I know I have at least enough. I don't know if I can get anything I want, but I know I have enough credit to switch a phone. But there's something about that. Even switching a phone had my stomach in butterflies, because it's like you've been put on trial and you want to know exactly how you're going to come back. There may be the slight possibility that someone got my credit or something happened and they come back and say, Mr. Chaney, you've been denied. Denied for what? To switch your cell phone service. God lets you know he understands that in this life we often are nervous. We often question where we stand with him. We often run through our mind or mull over the sense of our calling. But he says, just so that you relax, he says, listen, you're pre-qualified. You're qualified. Look at your neighbor, tell me, you've passed. You've passed. You've passed. Here's how I know, because he says those who love the Lord, we all love the Lord in this place. He said, no, they're called according to his purpose. And these are not two individual things that qualify us to be the individuals that all things work together for. They're actually meant to be seen as a package deal. The mere fact that you can respond that you love the Lord is a telltale sign that you've already been called by the Lord. Because you didn't just wake up one day and say, I think I want to serve Jesus. And while you may think there was a good message that came and you responded to the call as your heart was softened, you walked down, you may have thought this was a cognitive part of your process just because you wanted to give a brother a hug. But what you don't realize is the seed of God's intention was already planted in you, and he ordered your steps from your seat down that aisle or wherever it happened for you. It may have been on the street. It may have been in your mother's house. You may have walked down the aisle to give a brother a hug. But the reality is the seed of intention was sown before you ever responded. You feel as if you love Jesus because you came to the conclusion that he's just been that good, not realizing that what preceded your celebration or your love for Jesus was that he first loved you, was that he first drew you, was that he first put a seed of intention to you, that he first called you. You didn't love him and then become called. Let me try this side, sleep over here. You didn't love him and become called. You love him because you were. God, I wish I had time to work this. You love. No man comes into me, Jesus says, unless the Father who has sent me first draws him. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? Question to you is, what came first? Did you choose God, or did he put a seed of intention in you that caused him to be the only reasonable conclusion? Did he order your steps to his righteousness? Now, I know you have freedom of will. I know you have freedom of choice. But often what God does is he puts a seed of intention in you that causes your eyes to open for you to see his goodness. Or other times he changes circumstantial things in our life to lead us to him as the only reasonable conclusion. But whether the chicken or the egg came first, all I'm trying to tell you is the only reason you love him is because you were first called by him. So there is no love for him without the calling of you to himself. So you check box number one, that you love him. The only reason that you can love him is because the first box was checked, which is that he called you unto himself. So you're both loved and you're called, which qualifies you to be the one that all things work together for. Look at your neighbor and tell him, that's me. I'm pre-qualified. No matter what I feel like, I'm pre-qualified. I'm called. No matter what I did last night. It got so quiet. I'm called. I dropped it like it's hot. Called. Smoked up a little something before I came in here. See, I love the way the service flowed. 8 o'clock, there's a 10% ratchet ratio. 10%. 8:30 a.m., there are only a handful of those are disciplined folks that get up and have had it together for a long time. 9:30 service is about 30%. Ratchet ratio. When I say things like that, I got 30% amens. By 11:30, it's 50-50. You don't know what you... But whether they're righteous or ratchet, touch your neighbor on both sides. Tell them you're still called. His hand's still on you. Tell them you still qualified for all things to work. Now listen. Now listen. This idea, he says that you're qualified. Now I want you to see this. I can't tell you. I'm itching to tell you, but I've learned this week, I don't want to tell the congregation things that I've not first told the leaders. I want to prepare the leaders before I ever tell the congregation. But sometimes things get so good to you and change is bubbles in you so much that you break intention, you break protocol. I'm trying to talk about the change and the transformation that's going to continue to come to Antioch. I think we're already cool. I like it. I couldn't be, I'm sorry, I know to all my visitors, I couldn't be a member of any other church. I'm sorry if there was no Antioch, I'll just ask God to take me home. I'm sorry. I know you don't have to rep the set like me. You don't have to do it like me. You know what I'm saying? But I'm sorry. I like this place, and I cannot lie. I'm telling you right now. But with that said, there's a destiny that God has for us. He has not called us to stay where we are, but he's called us to reach beyond. We want to make this the church of our dreams, the church we dream about, the church our children live in, our children's children live in, and the church that other churches are birthed out of. We want other sister churches and baby churches. Are you with me? We want to see God's hand across this globe. There's so much that God wants to do, but it's going to require significant transition for us. And we're going to talk to you about that in the years to come. I got to talk to my leaders first, but it's just bubbling in me. I got back on the plane. I've been at a pastor's conference all week long. As I was on the plane, I tried to get a vision for the church, a new vision. I feel like God just wanted to refresh the vision of the church. Sometimes God needs to refresh things. The married folks better say amen. I want to, sometimes you need to just come in, break the rules. You need to come in, don't be as typical as you've been. Walk in. They expect you to walk in at 8 o'clock, say, hey, honey, go up to the bedroom, and then about an hour later, right before you go to bed, roll over and say, so you want to do something? I mean, they expect that. Break the protocol. Come in there 5 minutes early. Bring some flowers in your hand. Drop your bag and say, I don't even want to go upstairs. In fact, I don't need a bed. You cooking, baby? All right, clear that stuff out the way. Oh, you can't say amen. That's why you mad. That's why you came in here frowned up. Every now and then, all I'm trying to say is you've got to break protocol. I felt like the Antioch's been going good, but it needs to break protocol. There's something bigger that God has. There's something greater that he's looking to do through this place. There's something on the inside of us that is longing for more. And I'm getting a new vision for the church. God's beginning to speak to me about not just what he wants to do through us, but I'm beginning to see faces of people that, in fact, I'm going to talk to some of you after this service. I woke up with some of you on my mind, and you're sitting right here today. There's alignment coming. There's vision coming. There's fresh insight coming. And I said, I can't wait to bring the church into that. I'm going to take the leaders through it. We're going to reorganize so much. It's going to be a great time. We're going great already, but I want to go even higher. But as I begin to think about the church and ask God what the vision for the church is, God began to speak to me about you. Same passage. While we ask and we're driven by vision, has anybody ever asked the question, what is God's vision? What is God's vision for you? What is God's vision for his people? What is God's vision for his church? What is his purpose? Because our purpose should be his purpose, but we won't know our purpose until we understand his purpose. Here's what he says. He says the purpose of God, his purpose for those he's called. Listen, you've been called according to his purpose, but then he goes on to unpack what his purpose is. He says, for those he foreknew, he predestined. Here's what he says. He says to conform. His purpose for you is to conform you into the image of Jesus. I don't know if I'm just getting older. I don't know what it is, but I don't want to chase trivial pursuits. I don't want to be after anything that God is not after. I've spent too much time, spent too much resource, engaged in stuff that God may not care anything about. And I'm going to save you some time, even if you have not come to that conclusion. It's always best to get about God's business. Because if you're not about God's business, you're going to look up someday and you're going to realize that you've wasted time, that you've wasted money, that you've wasted significant relationships because you were not in line with God's purpose. And here's his purpose. Our goal is to work with him to accomplish his purpose. His purpose, listen, is to conform people who don't look like Jesus. Now, nobody will admit that sitting next to you. But if you know, that we need a little help in here, just look straight at me and wink your eyes twice. Don't tell them. His goal is, listen to me, to cause us, God, I wish I had time, to look more like, to conform us. But notice the path that he takes before he gets there. He says, he has, if you take notes, those who he's foreknown, he's also predestined to be conformed to the image of his son. Now, well, here's what he wants to do in this passage. He wants to settle in your hearts that you were pre-qualified to fulfill his ultimate purpose. And here's what he says. He realizes that as it relates to your call, we become uncertain concerning our call based on the circumstances in our life or based on how we feel. For the last 3 weeks, we've been describing how we feel versus what God says. Because our feelings will lead us often into error. Our thoughts concerning ourselves often will lead us into error because we don't always feel called. We don't always feel anointed. We don't always feel as if there's still a purpose for our life. I know you guys are much more spiritual than me, but there are times where I say, are the best years behind me? God wants you to know the best years are not behind you. They're ahead. He wants you to know no matter where you find yourself, no matter what you've done, no matter where you are, whether you feel it or you don't feel it. He says, there is a call for you. I've called you to be conformed into the image of my Son. Now, when did it happen? Here's what he wants to drive home. Because he understood your present frustration, and that your present frustration was either based on how you feel about yourself, it was based on your circumstance, it's based on your ability or your view of your ability. So here's what he does. He says, my qualification of you has nothing to do with right now. He says, notice this, you're called. Just elbow your neighbor like you're mad at him. Tell him you better shake out of this mess you've been in. You better shake out of this defeat you've had over your life. Get out of this sense of that you're unqualified, or that God's not going to back you, or that God's not walking with you, or that he's left you alone, or you're going to die right here where you are. You better get up out of it. Put your little bony finger in their face. Tell them, Negro, Anglo, Latino, whoever you're sitting next, tell them, you better get out of it. Tell them there's still a call on your life. There's still an anointing on your life. There's still a destiny on your life. Whether you feel it, tell them I'm not playing, because somebody walked in here and doesn't feel like it. Somebody knows that they've done great things for God, but they haven't felt him move through them in a long time. Put your finger in their face and tell them you are the called according to God's purpose. You. Here's how I know that he has secured here. So he shows us, because he knows that our current circumstance will mess with our sense of calledness. So he says, your calledness did not come in your lifetime. He said your calledness came before your lifetime. He said those who he foreknew. He knew you before you were you. Huh? In fact, he knew you before, now if you're like me, before your daddy saw your mom at the prom. He knew you before that smooth cat spit some game at your mama. I'm hitting all the errors, brothers. He knew you before your mom got dressed that day and said, I'm going to hurt him today. He knew you before, my case, before your dad rolled over to your mom and said, uh-oh. He knew you. All right, let me get more righteous. While your mama was praise dancing and your daddy was praise dancing in church and looked up after a shout and saw your mother and she saw him and knew they were the one because they were bucking the same way. Before all that, he knew you. In fact, before the foundation of the earth was ever laid, before he hung a star in the sky, before he put sand on the seashore, before he put vegetation on the earth, before he created seed time and harvest, the Bible says he foreknew you. He shaped, formed, and fashioned you. He thought about you. He had you on his mind. For all those who feel as if you slip between the cracks, God sent me in this place to declare you never slip between the cracks. No matter what your circumstance is, he saw your path from the beginning to the end before you ever were, before you ever hung a star in the sky, and he declared that you were called. Look at your neighbor. Tell him if you were called then, you're still called now. He had you on his mind before there was ever anything. He had you on his mind before there was ever a mistake. He had you on his mind before you were ever depressed. He had you on his mind before you ever doubted your ability. He had you on his mind before you ever said, never mind God. He had you on his mind. You were foreknown. But then it says you were predestined. I I love his word. He said you were predestined. He said you were destined. He said you were destined to go somewhere. You were destined to walk a path. You were destined to carry certain things out in your life. You were destined, but not just immediately, not instantaneously. It did not come when you were saved. It did not come when you said, I surrender all. It did not come when you finally concluded that you wanted to give Jesus your life. But his foreknowledge goes with his predestination. So before you ever were, not only did he know you and shape and mold you, look at the circumstances of your life and declare, I'm going to get glory out of that boy. I'm going to get glory out of that girl. He foreknew you that way, but then he also predestined. He carved out a path also before any star was ever hung in the sky, before the firmament of the sky was separated from the firmament of the waters of the earth. Before he ever did any of those things, he saw not only who you were, but he also saw your path, the path that you would take. And he connects who he called you to be to the path that he called you to walk. He looked at the path, looked at you, looked at the path, looked at you, looked at the path, looked at you, and said, let me bring these things together and call it destiny. God, I wish I had time. So no matter where I find myself in this life, no matter what the struggle is, God, before I ever was, already looked at the path, looked at me, and said, let me shape him or let me shape her for the path that I've called them to walk. That's how I know you're going to make it through no matter what comes your way. That's how I know you have enough in you to overcome your circumstance. That's how I know your sense of doubt concerning your call or your ability is only temporary. God, I wish I had time, because he made you to walk. God, I know the lights are dim, it's so cool, but look at your neighbor. Tell me, he made you to walk that path. Tell him, you can't walk my path. I can't walk your path. Because you were not foreknown to walk my predestined path. I was not foreknown to walk your predestined path. That's how you look at the things I'm going through and say, I would have blown my brains out if I had to go through everything he's going through. And you're still wondering how I'm smiling, how I'm praising, how I'm still in the race. I'm still in the race not because I'm strong. I'm in the race because I was predestined. He ordered my steps. The steps of a righteous man are ordered by God. And it's not just the good guy, but it's those that God has called unto himself and declared righteous. If you're declared righteous, look at your neighbor, tell them your steps. I know you can't see the rest of the path, but your step right here is exactly where it's supposed to be. And even if it's not, God will redirect your steps. Because before you ever were, he declared, I'm going to get the glory out of them. Slap your neighbor real quick, tell them I'm predestined. I'm predestined. I'm predestined. God, I'm sorry, I'm trying. I don't want to get too excited, but forgive me, because there are times where doubt sinks in. There are times where discouragement sinks in. There are times where I have to ask myself, God, have you forgotten about me? There are times where it seems as if things don't go together. There are times that you step out by faith and say, God's about to bless us, y'all. And the people of God look up and we're still in the same position, still in the same predicament. And I start saying, God, what's going on? Holler back at your boy. But I need to know from time to time that even in the middle of my frustration, before the earth was ever created, God saw my frustration, but he also created the path of victory. I don't know how long I'm going to have to be in the valley. I don't know how long I'm going to have to cry about this thing. I don't know how long there's going to be a season of frustration. I don't know how long I'm going to work and nothing moves. But what I do know is that as long as there's breath in my body, there is another place God has for me. Look at your neighbor and say, I'm predestined. Now, can we take it a little bit further? You guys knew that was all review, but let me take it a little bit further. This word, this idea of predestined, he says, I am predestined. If you take notes, the etymology of the Greek word, verb is translated for predestined suggests a marking out of boundaries beforehand. All right, let me see if I can help you. It is not simply him ordering my steps, but it is, God, I feel this. It is creating boundaries beforehand. Lord have mercy. Give me a handheld. I'm tired of this. Creating boundaries. That was for lecturers. That's not for preachers. And I feel a little anointing in this place. I'm sorry. It is a mark. It is a marking of, I'm predestined, of boundaries. He orders my steps. But simultaneously, it's a loaded word. The idea is that he lays the path before me, but it is not a path that is always bright. Well, I just know where to go every day I wake up. I know you guys are more spiritual than me. Just wake up speaking in tongues, and you'll know where to go every day. Look at your neighbor and tell them, that's for y'all spiritual folks. That's for y'all spiritual folks. But some of us are not as illuminated as you. So God does not always every morning wake you up and lay out your daily itinerary. You don't always know everything that you're going to go through, everything that you're going to experience, everything the day will bring. You don't always know exactly what step to take today. My vision is clear. My mission is clear. My assignment is clear on today. No, you don't. Shut up. But does anybody know what it is to wake up with questions? To wake up and say, where do I go today? And feel as if you're aimlessly walking sometimes. To feel as if you're pushing and running into stuff. But interestingly, whether God illuminates my path by showing me the way daily, or by revelation showing me everywhere I should go, or whether he hedges me in, the end result is the same. And that is, I will get ultimately where he wants me to go. Try this out. It says, listen, he creates, look at your neighbor, tell him boundaries, because he knows my tendency sometimes is to drift. All we like sheep have gone astray. And for sheep need, God, I feel like, they need boundaries. Have any of you ever drifted from God's purpose? Have any of you ever felt like you've aimlessly walked? He says that it is a setting of boundaries. In other words, no matter where you are, whether it's your mistake or whether it's your lack of clarity, this lets us know that God will only let me go so far if I'm called according to his purpose. If I love him, when I see my way, it's great. But there are times when I can't see my way. There are times when I can't see my next step. But here's what I know. Even when I can't see my next step, he predestined, he created boundaries. So even though it feels like drifting, every now and then I come into contact with a boundary. How do you know it's a boundary? It's a boundary when it changes your direction. I love God, but I did not always keep his ways, if the truth were told. But one night, I got out there, and I turned up for real. I mean, all the way. I didn't leave anything in the tank. I was poured out. Paul said I was poured out like a drink offering. I was poured out like a sin offering. Y'all for real. I let it all hang out. I mean, my mother used to stay up waiting for me late night. If I came in, I would try to sneak in. She was sitting up in the chair waiting. Like, nah, not today, Playboy. But one night I got out there and lost my mind. I said, I'm getting it all out. Tonight's the night. And I went all in and got jerked up. Now, I thought that God just gave me over. I thought that this was a deal breaker. It was. Now, I don't know what you have done. I don't know what fence you've come up against or what boundary you've come up against. I simply know it's a boundary when it changes your direction and you say, oh, I've gone too far. Let me turn around. Right. I went back to the house. I'll spare you the details, but I went back to the house. My mother was already asleep. I shook her. I said, Mom, get up. I was so jacked up, grown man, climbed into the bed, my late teens, climbed into the bed with her, tucked under the covers, said, you can spank me, you can take the car keys, you can give me a curfew, just hold me. She looks at me in my crisis and smiles at me. I said, what you smiling at? She said, oh, God told me to go to bed. She said, I got him covered. Because I can't see what you're doing does not mean that God is not on the job. God told me he was going to let you stray for a minute, but after a while, you would hit a boundary. And the boundary, God, I feel this, would bring you back to the path that he had for your life. I got a little bit more work to do, but give your neighbor a high five. So thank God for the boundary. If it wasn't for the boundary, I wouldn't have the call. If it wasn't for the boundary, I wouldn't have turned around. If it was not for the boundary, I wouldn't have been used by God. If it was not for the boundary, the anointing would not flow through my life. Thank God for the boundary. Yes, I drift, but the boundary will send me back. Give your neighbor a high five. Tell them, thank God for the boundaries. Thank God for the boundaries. Thank God for the boundaries. Thank him. Your job. God, I wish I had time. I have 45 seconds. I'm going to take 3 minutes. Your job is in the process is Romans 12:2. Your job in the process is Romans 12:2. It says, do not be conformed any longer to the image of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now that word conformed is a compound word. And that word conform is the idea of form merging and forming. It is a merged forming. It says, don't be merged into the image of this world. In other words, if you're in his kingdom, people should be able to look at you. And you shouldn't look, oh, it got real quiet, like you're merged and mingled with that which does not honor our God. It should not look, when people look at you, the defining characteristic should not be that which stands in opposition to our God. You should not be merged and mingled and tied into that which opposes God. He says this. He says, do not be conformed any longer to the image of that which opposes God. But he says you are to be transformed by the renewing, you are to be metamorphosized by the renewing of your mind. In other words, I need to start thinking the thoughts that God thinks. I need to start speaking in a way that God speaks. I need to engage in what Jesus engaged in. I need to worship him. I need to be in an environment from time to time where my thoughts and my value systems are shaped and framed in godliness. I don't just let myself drift into ungodliness. I don't let myself just drift and merge with that which does not honor God. But there comes a time where there ought to be a distinction. You ought to look at me and see more Jesus than you do the world. There ought to be a time where you look at me and the characteristics, the speech patterns, the thinking and the responses, the disposition should look more like Jesus than it does what he brought me out of. Now, I'm not saying that your timeline is the same as my timeline. What I am saying is there comes a moment where there needs to be a distinction. Look at your neighbor, tell them, are you distinct? Are you distinct? Are you sanctified? Are you set apart? When people see you, do they see him? Is there something of your essence? Is there something of your nature that causes people to see a glimpse of heaven? He says, because he was the firstborn amongst many brethren. Here's the idea. He says he's the firstborn. And he says, your job, or like the natural family, the rest of the brothers that come after look like the firstborn. if they have the same parents. Try this side. The rest, I'm number one. The rest of the brothers should look like me. If they have, he uses a biological term, they should look like me if they have the same, they should look like me, the firstborn. If the same, I'm trying to keep it holy, scientific term. If the sperm, hit the same egg, same DNA. If we have the same parents, we should look alike. But if we don't have the same DNA, we may kind of resemble, but we don't all look alike. God says, I've implanted my word into you. He said, there ought to come a time where you look like the firstborn brother. But here's the reason that they can't tell y'all kin. He said, you have the seed that's been implanted, but you've presented a different egg. You have the seed of God's purpose mixed with the world system, and as long as that's blending together and creating the conception of behavior in your life or disposition in your life, you don't look like your eldest brother. Now, I told all my brothers, you have to be good. But I told Chris, you need to really be good. Because people come up to Chris, particularly when he shaves his hair and shaves his face like mine. They come up, no matter where he is, and say, Pastor, will you pray for me? I said, Chris, if you decide that you want to lose your mind, then it's going to affect my reputation. Because when people look at us, your resemblance affects my reputation. God says, listen, you ought to look like your eldest brother. Because the resemblance that you do have, that you don't live up to, causes contradiction. So people are looking for a glimpse of Jesus. But when they bump into the brother, they said, oh, no, I don't know about that Jesus. I said, Chris, if you act a fool, even if I'm not present and wasn't there, implicated in it, they're going to come looking for me. Are you still here with me? They're going to start talking and taking my name and dragging it through the mud. Chris said, I may grow my hair back. I don't know, right? Years ago, he said, I may grow my hair back. I said, no, keep your hair bald, but just let's try to get on the same page. Let's try to get on the same wavelength. And this is where God helps us in our inability. Because our part is to conform into the image of his son, or our part is to not conform to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind. But here's what I know about me. I will not always choose to be transformed, brother. I know you're much more holy than me. But for me, there are some blind spots in my life. For me, like some of you, there are still some struggles that you go through. Oh, nobody in the house. For me, there are times where even if I want to do the right thing, or if I want to live up to Christ's standard, there are blind spots. There are things I just don't know. There are things I have not seen yet. Now, how do you conform someone to the image of this world when their responsibility is image of Christ, when their responsibility is to be transformed by the renewing of their mind, but there's an ignorance gap sometimes? What do you do when there's somebody that wants to be conformed into the image of his son, Jesus Christ, by the renewing of their mind, but there are certain things that they are bound to and they struggle through? Now, your part is
to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But even with your best efforts, there are still blind spots. There are still things that you don't know or see. So while your part is to be transformed by renewing your mind, his part is to conform you into the image of Christ by any means necessary. God, I feel like preaching this. He said that the call for your life is to be conformed. So the world is trying to conform you into his image, but my job is to conform you into his image. God, I feel this. The world is trying to pull you away from the purposes of God, but my job is to push you toward the purposes of God. And so we have a standoff. God, I feel like preaching this. What do you do when there's an internal standoff? When the world's pulling you one way, or your ignorance is pulling you one way, but God's purpose is attempting to pull you another way, where the world is trying to do the same thing that God's trying to do, and that is to conform you into the image of itself. God says, I got your back. Even in your weakness, I got your back. Even in your uncertainty, I got your back. Even in your lack of knowledge, I have your back. Because no matter what the world is trying to do, seek my face, and I will cause my mark to be left on you. I will cause you to merge, God, I feel this, in with me to the image of my son, Jesus Christ, slowly, one day at a time. I'm about to close, I promise you that. I had an aquarium one time. And I am probably go down the Guinness Book of World Records for killing more saltwater fish than any person on the face of this planet. I went to a friend's house. He had a beautiful saltwater tank. I thought I would get like him. I didn't realize he paid people to come in and set his up. I tried to bootleg the job. And so I read the manual and tried to get my saltwater tank. I've been trying this for years, and all of my fish always die. God, I wish I had time to work this. My fish die. I mean, no matter what I do, I follow to the letter of the law. I mean, all my fish always die. I mean, but I realized that when you move in anything from one ecosystem to another too fast or instantaneously, sometimes even with good intention, you kill the thing that you've moved into a different environment, because even though, listen, your desire was to move them from one environment to another, radical transformation sometimes will kill the one that you're trying to move from one place into the other. God says, I'm not like you. I know how to switch a fish from one environment to another. I'm not like you. I know how to bring my people out of Egypt into the promised land. I don't take them out of Egypt instantaneously and bring them into the promised land, because they can't stand up under the weight of the blessing of the promised land if I don't take them through a transition period to work the wilderness or to work Egypt out of their system. So you have to put sometimes, you have to gradually transition the fish from one dimension to another, or from one ecosystem to another. It takes a skillful fisherman to bring you into that process. And here's what I know. I don't know how they do it, but I know they gradually bring people. That's why you can't let anybody judge whether you're saved or not by something that happened. Oh, he's not saved. You don't know where I've come from. You don't know what I've gone through. You don't know how hardcore I was. You don't know how crazy things were. And while you may have instantaneously changed because you were a goody two-shoe, it may take God some time to work this out of my system, because he's got something for me. Touch somebody, give them a high five real quick, slap them, do whatever you want to, and tell them God is transitioning me. That's why it's been so weird or crazy in this season of your life, because he's gradually bringing you from one dimension into another. He's changing the secular mindset. He's changing the unrenewed thoughts. He's changing the hard heart. And when you look up, you may not be where you expect to be, but like an evolutionary chart, you ought to be able to look back over your shoulder and see where the Lord has brought you from. You may have started crawling in the muck or the mire. That was phase 1. But phase 2, you are still hunched, but you begin to stand up upright. Phase 3, your back got straight, but your lower half was still broken. I don't know where you are, but if you walk with him, you ought to be conforming to the image of his son. Quick check real quick to see if you're the called. Do you look like you do when he brought you in? Are you still as crazy as when you were first saved? As long as there's progress, it means that God's hand is still on my life. We gotta go, but give somebody a high five. It's your neighbor. God's hand is still on my life. When I'm up, it's on my life. When I'm down, it's on my life. When I can see my way, it's on my life. But when I can't see my way, it's still on my life. Touch people up, it's on me, 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 it's on me. Now the question becomes, how does he leave his mark on you? I'm glad you asked me. In times of old, the king would take his signet ring in order for you to know that the document was sent by him and that it was verified. He would take his signet ring and he would leave his mark on the letter, but he would imprint it into the wax. The Bible declares that he left his seal on me. What is the picture of this transforming or conforming into the image of Christ? It is the picture of like a king putting his mark or his signet ring on me. When they carry the letter to its intended purpose, into its intended place, they look at the letter. They don't have the ring itself, but they have the shape or the signet or the image of the ring. And if they see the image on the signet letter, then they know that it was truly sent by the king, because he has his unique mark. There's no mark like the king's mark. There's no one else that has the same design as the king has. So when they saw his seal on the wax, they knew that the letter was sent by the king. God, I gotta go here, but real quick, it's interesting that the king never put his ring on ordinary wax, because when he first gets the wax is too hard for him to put his signet ring on. So what he does is he applies heat to the wax. God, I feel like preaching. Give your neighbor a high five and tell him God's not trying to kill you. I know things have been heating up. I know trials have come, but God is not trying to kill you. He's just warming you. He's warming you up. Your will was too hard, but he's warming you up. Your spirit was too hard, but he's warming you up. Your heart was too hard, but he's warming you up. Tell somebody the fire is not to kill you. The fire is to make you fit for the master's use. The fire is to make you look more like his image. The fire is to cause the hate to melt away. The fire is to take you from your stubborn position and say, yes, Lord, I will do ministry. Yes, Lord, I will answer your call. If you still haven't moved, the fire hadn't been hot enough yet. But take somebody who feels like they can't take the heat in the kitchen. Tell them God's not killing you, nor is he cooking you, but God is forming you. God is making you look more like Christ. God is changing your mind, changing your heart. How do you know it's done? When you say, yes, Lord, send me. I'll go. I'll speak. I'll lead. I'll bless. I'll give. I'll be poured out. Lord, I'll go. Touch somebody to the Lord. God's got his hand on you. He's got his hand on you. He's got his hand. Not only is he heating me up, but he's pressing on me. My situation has felt oppressive. I was expecting a refund and I got audited. I was expecting a turnaround in my relationship, but I'm still being pressed. I was expecting everything to come together this time last week, but I feel like I'm being pressed. God sent me in this place as a certified letter telling you he's not trying to kill you, but he's trying to bring the anointing out of you like never before. He's making you look more like Jesus. Lift up your voice, lift up your hands, throw back your head, and give God a shout. Tell somebody, when I come out of this, I'm going to look more like Jesus. When I come out of this, I'm going to bless those who curse me. When I come out of this, I'm going to send a gift to those who walked on me. When I come out of this, my heart will be pure. When I come out of this, my mind will be renewed. When I come out of this, my circumstance will be transformed. When I come out of this, I'll be like Joseph, who said, you meant it for evil, but God is turning around for my good. I gotta go. But the writer concludes that when I'm up, his stand is still on me. When I'm down, his mark is still on me. When my marriage is good, his mark's on me. When my marriage is bad, it's still on me. When I feel like singing, it's on me. When I don't feel like singing another song, it's on me. When I feel like worshiping, it's on me. So when I'm patting like a baby, it's still on me. So grab a neighbor real quick. Give me a praise partner. Tell them, so what shall we say to all these things? If God be for me, who can be against me? Matter of fact, tell them, God's for you. 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 He's for you. Now you can run. Now you can believe. Now you can serve. God